call from my part-time chiropractic assistant, and she tells me that her sister delivered a beautiful baby girl during the night, and she has been crying, the baby has, constantly for 8 hours, nonstop, a cry like she's never heard before, and she only stops when she passes out. And she says to me, "Doc, do you think you could help her?" Just think back. 3 months in practice, I have never put my hands on a baby in my life. I knew babies could be adjusted, but I'd never had the experience of adjusting a baby. And so I said to her, well, if she's subluxated, of course I can help her. And my initial thought in my own head was, when she gets out of the hospital, bring her into the office. Well, what typically happens in a hospital birth? Certainly back then, they stay in the hospital for 2 or 3 days. But my innate says to me, who's her doctor? And she says, Dr. Prue. I said, is there any way you can get him on the phone? Because he happened to be one of our practice members, the only physician that was a practice member in my office. She gets him on the phone. I have a conversation with him, more on the diagnosis side. I ask him to make sure that, I'm willing to go see her at lunchtime at the hospital, make sure that he's had a good C-spine x-ray done, make sure they've looked at her clavicles to make sure she doesn't have a clavicular fracture, etc. I show up at the hospital. I do a quick examination of the child after speaking with the physician, and this little baby girl is screaming like I'd never heard in my life. I put her in her auntie's lap. I palpate her atlas. I take my 2 thumbs. I do a little tiny toggle on her atlas, and that thing blows up like a bomb, like literally an audible. And I was told, you never get audibles when you adjust children. This child was like less than 12 hours old by the time I got there. Boom! And she automatically gets quiet. It has like this little smile on her face. Oh my gosh. Yay, ego, right? Like I was excited. And I thought I was really good. And I walked out of that hospital like a peacock. Around 8 o'clock that night, I get a phone call from Janine, the auntie, and she says, Doc, after you left, she fed, and then she fell asleep, and she's been sleeping ever since. Do you think that maybe you did something wrong? And I said, well, if you had been crying for 12 hours nonstop, and you were a newborn, wouldn't you be tired? Of course she should be sleeping. And she was like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, I'll call you later. Hangs up. I hang up the phone. Now I'm shaking. The ego is completely gone. The fear is completely set in. And I start wondering, second-guessing myself. Did I really do the right thing? What was my intention when I put my 2 thumbs on her atlas? Was I focused? And I take myself all the way through that, and I was like, yes, I was focused. I had my intention. I felt innately driven. I felt that I was being guided to do this. And so I should just go to sleep, which I did. And the next morning around 6 o'clock, I get a phone call from Janine describing this beautiful wake-up. When Mona woke up that, a few hours later, and she fed and she pooped and she did everything a baby's supposed to do, and now she was resting calmly and had awakened again, and it was just all so beautiful and just in that state of gratitude. Fast forward to July 23rd, 2012. I got a phone call from my son-in-law, my daughter's husband, that my first granddaughter just came into the world. A week early from what they had calculated, but we know she wasn't early. She was born when she was supposed to be born. Born at home, natural, in a tub. Everything went super well with a midwife. And so I'm like grateful, and I've got, all sorts of things on my agenda, so I plan to go and visit the following week. I get online, I buy myself a flight ticket, and I'm going to head to Edmonton, Alberta. So a week later, I'm heading to Edmonton, Alberta I land in Toronto, and I just text my daughter that, just landed in Toronto, look forward to seeing you soon, look forward to meeting Carrington, I'm all excited. And for moms in the audience, you'll appreciate this. My daughter texts back, and she said, I think I'm not a very good mom. And it brings me back to 1979. And my automatic reply, because Carrington's been crying nonstop for 7 days. I didn't know that. Carrington was checked by a chiropractor the first day. I will tell you that she wasn't necessarily adjusted. But my automatic on the text was to answer back to Alana and said, have no worry, I'll be there in 4 hours. I'm getting on the next flight. That was innate. Have no worry, I'll be there. These hands, your hands, my hands, that innate intelligence in that body, they're all miracles just waiting to happen. And I totally trusted that. I get picked up at the airport by my daughter, and she said, you think she's sleeping? She just passed out, Dad. She's been crying nonstop. And I was just thinking, just like little Mona. We get to the house, take her out of the car seat. She immediately awakens. She immediately starts to scream. And the scream that my daughter had described, which is what I thought was what I had heard 30 plus years before, was exactly the same scream I was hearing right there. And so I looked at my granddaughter, same type of subluxation of the atlas. I laid her on my lap. Poof, the same thing, right? Just an explosive atlas. Stops crying, literally smiles at me like an angel, as if she was saying, thank you, Papa. Whoa, this is so good, right? She's 3 years old now. I mean, she's like super cool and all that stuff. Why would I tell you these two stories? Just to tell you a story? What would have happened to Mona if Janine hadn't known about the possibility that chiropractic could alter Mona's life? What if Alana wasn't born a chiropractic baby and hadn't known that her daughter should get checked and adjusted if necessary? How many Monas and Carringtons live in your community, subluxated, not knowing what hope and what possibility exists in the life of their children? How many of these children live right in our own backyards? And I would venture to say hundreds of thousands and millions in this country alone, because they don't know. And they don't know because we haven't done a very good job in telling them the story. We did want this theme for this weekend to be about new patients. This is about new patients. This is about changing the world based on the knowledge that you have and the gifts that you have. And you know what? I'm not a mind reader, but I'm pretty good at feeling energy. And I know, without a doubt, that some of you in this audience right now have already told yourself, I don't know if I can do that. I'm a little too shy. I can't do what Dr. Eddie talked about. I could have never stood up here like Dr. Josh did and tell the story. What if I stood up here like Dr. Gilles and I started to cry trying to tell his story? What would I do? Right? Some of you have felt that. I was fortunate enough to have awesome mentors. And I remember the day in a suite at a seminar like this, sitting with a few docs. And I was fortunate because I had a mentor when I was in chiropractic college. And I was very successful literally right out of the gate. I started my own practice, in July of 1979. By the end of July, I was already doing great. By the end of October, I was like, wow, is this even possible? But what I learned from my mentors were lessons that were important that I didn't only hear, but I chose to implement. And the one lesson that I believe for me was the greatest lesson was to transform myself from an image of being a shy little guy to being one that was willing to share the truth. So there I was, because they had asked me to bring in my statistics from my practice. And I brought my statistics. They were laid out on a dining room table. And my mentor, my main mentor at the time, who happened to be Dr. Jim Parker, looked at my stats and said, "Oh my gosh, you really are seeing all these people. How are you doing that?" And I basically said, I listened to my mentors. I implemented what they told me to do. And, you know, shake hands, kiss babies, hand out cards. I handed out 5,000 business cards my first year in practice. That's 100 cards a week for 50 weeks. That was all I thought I could do. Because I could shake your hands, Daniel, and give you my card, shaking like crazy. But to think that I would speak to a group like this was totally outside my paradigm of possibility for my life. When I described what I'd been doing, Dr. Richard Yenny, who practiced in Kansas City, Missouri, until his passing just a couple of years ago for, 60-something years, Richard said to me, and I paraphrase, but these are the words because it was a long conversation. But the words were, first he said, "You need to get on stage with me tomorrow and share this with the audience." I was like, "Oh no, you don't understand. I can't do that. There's no way. I'm like way too shy." And he basically said, "What gives you the right to know a truth and not share it?" And I remember him because it was painful. It wasn't the words. It was the fact that he was sticking his index in my chest. And Richard was, I guess, a karate master. Every martial arts you can think of, Richard was a master. So if you can imagine having a guy like that stick his finger in your chest, and I couldn't answer the question, and so he kept poking his index in my chest and repeating the question, "What gives you the right to know truth and not share it?" And finally I went, "Nothing, nothing, nothing." He says, "You're right. Nothing gives you that right. So I'll see you tomorrow morning in the front row. And when I call on you, you will come to the stage, and I promise I won't embarrass you. Just look at me. If you're feeling shy, intimidated, say, just look at me. I'm going to ask you a few questions. You're going to share those answers with me. The audience will hear it. And there's only going to be about 3,000 people in the audience anyway. And you just need to pretend that you're just with me. You could have a conversation with me, correct?" I said, "Of course I could have a conversation with you." He said, "Well, that's what we're going to do." And so he called me onto that stage. And we all understand physiology, right? We all understand what happens when you get into a sympathetic state. Like, honestly, I really did think I was going to wet my pants. I was so afraid. And after the conversation, I was like so relaxed. And I thought, if I could do that, if what I shared helped one chiropractor in the audience, how would that impact my community if I developed a skill to share that with my community? How many little Monas wouldn't have to go through what she went through? How many people who've never understood the value of chiropractic care could get under chiropractic care? So if you are where I was in 1979, well, most of you weren't born then, but I mean, if you were where I were emotionally, I ask you this question because I love you, not because I want to hurt you. But what gives you the right? What gives you the right to know a truth and not share it? That's a question. I want an answer. What gives you that right? Exactly. Nothing gives you the right to know a truth and not share it. So my advice, get over it. Because when we're afraid, we're making it about ourselves. And they taught me to face the fear, do it anyway. Was I afraid the first time I did a public talk to 12 people or 8 people? It was a small group. Yeah, I was scared. And I got over it. And somebody in the front row smiled. And so I connected on her smile like I'm doing with you right now, right? All of you right here, you're all smiling. How great is that? I said smile, they smiled. So I learned if I talked about smiling to my audience, they smiled more. It made me feel okay. And I felt good, and I could speak the truth from my heart. And when you learn to speak the truth from your heart, I was going to say you'll be amazed, but I'm asking you just to accept the fact that when you speak the truth from your heart's going to open even bigger. I'm sure somebody this weekend said, you know, the hole you give from is the hole, or the hole you give through is the hole you receive from. Right? It's the same thing. So as I learned to give more of myself, of my talents, of my knowledge, I started seeing everything that I was receiving. I started seeing the beauty of the community that we built in our practice. Lesson number 1, be willing to share the truth. And quickly, with my minute and 21 seconds, because I will end on time, because I'm like the timekeeper, right? Take care of yourself. Dr. Riegman talked about it during lunch. Take care of you. I thought I was under regular care. Dr. Ribley was sitting beside me at lunch, and he said, you know, the importance of having your spine checked regularly and receiving an adjustment when necessary is what's important. It's not about getting adjusted every day, every week. Receiving your adjustment when necessary. I stopped practice in 2003 because I was told I was going to be dead by 2005. I thought I'd been under regular chiropractic care, but it was never with the same chiropractors, whoever I was hanging out with that day or having lunch with that day. So I was told I had primary pulmonary hypertension. Most people die within 24 months of diagnosis. I started regular chiropractic care a month after I retired from practice. And within 2 years, my heart that had expanded to 2.5 times its normal size went back to its normal size because the body has an ability to adapt to stresses. And when the stresses are gone, your body does what it's supposed to do. And here we are today, all of us today and yesterday, learning the value of real, true chiropractic care. That's what I want for all of you. Thank you for your smiles. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the beauty that you bring into this room. And thank you for being a chiropractor.